Most people think destiny is decided by one big moment, a breakthrough opportunity, a lucky break, a powerful decision. But psychologically and philosophically, that's not how human lives are shaped. Identity is not built in moments of intensity. It's built in moments of repetition. What you do occasionally might impress people, but what you do repeatedly defines you. And whether you realize it or not, your habits are voting every single day for the person you are becoming. The mind does not argue with repetition. It accepts it. When you wake up and scroll before you think, when you avoid discomfort before you even name your goals, when you delay action and call it patience, your brain is learning something about who you are, not from what you say you want, but from what you practice. Over time, those repeated behaviors stop feeling like choices and start feeling like personality. That's why change feels so hard. Not because you lack willpower, but because you're trying to act against an identity your habits have already reinforced. Philosophically, this is uncomfortable because it removes excuses. It means destiny isn't something waiting for you in the future. It's something you're rehearsing daily in the present. You are not becoming what you think about most. You are becoming what you do most. Thoughts matter, yes, but habits are thoughts made physical. They are beliefs expressed through behavior. If someone says they value growth but avoids discipline, the habit tells the truth. If someone says they want success but practices inconsistency, the habit exposes the lie. Psychology shows us that the brain craves efficiency. It automates what you repeat so it can conserve energy. That's powerful when the habit serves you and dangerous when it doesn't. Because once something becomes automatic, you stop questioning it. You stop noticing it. And that's how years disappear, not through dramatic failure, but through quiet patterns left unexamined. This is why motivation alone never changes a life. Motivation is emotional. Habits are structural. Motivation comes and goes, but habits stay. When behavior becomes routine, effort decreases and consistency increases. That's how ordinary people build extraordinary outcomes. Not by doing extreme things once, but by doing meaningful things daily, even when no one is watching and nothing exciting is happening. Here's the deeper truth. Most people resist. You don't rise to the level of your dreams. You sink to the level of your habits. When pressure hits, when life gets heavy, when excuses feel justified, you won't suddenly become disciplined. You'll default to whatever you've practiced. That's not weakness. That's human nature. Which means your daily habits are not small. They are preparation. They are training. They are shaping how you respond to life before life even tests you. And this applies to everything. Confidence, focus, self-respect, resilience. Confidence isn't built by affirmations. It's built by keeping small promises to yourself repeatedly. Focus isn't found. It's trained through habits that protect attention. Self-respect grows when your daily actions align with your stated values. When they don't, the mind fractures. You feel it as anxiety, frustration, or self-doubt. But the root is behavioral inconsistency. The good news is this. If habits create identity, then habits can also recreate it. You don't have to overhaul your entire life today. You don't need a dramatic transformation. You need awareness and intention. You need to ask yourself, honestly, what am I rehearsing every day? Because whatever that answer is, that's the direction your life is moving, whether you like it or not. Destiny doesn't announce itself. It whispers through routine. Change the repetition and you change the outcome. Because in the end, you don't wake up one day and become successful, disciplined, or fulfilled. You wake up as whoever your habits have been training you to be all along. Once people understand that habits shape identity, the next realization hits even harder. Intention alone is useless without discipline. Everyone intends to change. Everyone wants more focus, more success, more peace. Intention is easy because it lives in the imagination. Discipline is difficult because it lives in behavior. And the distance between who you want to be and who you actually become is measured by how disciplined you are on an ordinary day. Psychologically, discipline is not about punishment or force. It's about alignment. It's the ability to make your actions match your long-term values instead of your short-term emotions. The human brain is wired to avoid discomfort and seek immediate relief. That wiring isn't a flaw, it's survival. But when survival instincts are left untrained in a modern world, they quietly sabotage progress. Discipline steps in where emotion tries to take control. It doesn't argue with feelings, it overrides them with structure. This is why discipline feels restrictive at first. The ego wants freedom, but what it usually means is freedom from effort. Real freedom comes later, after discipline has done its work. Structure creates momentum. Momentum creates confidence. Confidence creates choice. Without discipline, you are at the mercy of your moods, your energy levels, and your circumstances. With discipline, you become internally governed instead of externally controlled. Philosophically, discipline is an act of self-respect. It's the decision to take your future seed wisely enough to inconvenience your present. When you follow through on small commitments, you're telling yourself, my word matters. When you don't, even in private, trust erodes. That erosion doesn't show up immediately, but over time it becomes self-doubt, hesitation, and inconsistency. Discipline repairs that fracture by restoring trust between who you say you are and how you act. Most people wait to feel ready before they act. Discipline flips that order. It acts first and allows emotion to catch up later. You don't work out because you feel strong. You feel strong because you worked out. You don't focus because you're inspired. Inspiration shows up after focus is practiced. This reversal is uncomfortable, but it's also the doorway to growth. The mind resists discipline initially because it interprets effort as threat. Repetition rewires that response. What was once hard becomes normal. What was once normal becomes beneath you. Another misunderstanding is that discipline requires intensity. It doesn't. It requires consistency. Intensity burns out, consistency builds. Discipline is choosing to show up at a manageable level every day instead of at an extreme level once in a while. That's how systems outperform motivation. Systems don't rely on emotion. They rely on commitment. And commitment is what carries you through the days when motivation is absent and no one is applauding your effort. Discipline also simplifies life. When decisions are pre-made through habits of ND routines, mental energy is free. You don't waste time negotiating with yourself. You already decided who you are and how you act. That clarity reduces stress and increases execution. The disciplined life looks rigid from the outside, but internally, it creates peace. There's less chaos because there's less internal debate. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Talent without discipline is potential wasted. Intelligence without discipline becomes distraction. Passion without discipline turns into frustration. Discipline is the bridge that carries everything else across. Without it, intention stays trapped on one side, forever imagined, never realized. And once discipline becomes part of your identity, you stop asking whether you feel like doing what matters. You do it because that's who you are now. Not perfect, not robotic, but consistent. And consistency changes everything. If intention is what you want and discipline is what you do, then your future will always belong to the version of you that shows up, especially on the days you don't feel like it. Once discipline becomes the bridge between intention and outcome, the question shifts from whether you're disciplined to win and where that discipline is applied. And this is where the beginning and the end of your day quietly take control of your future. Your mornings and your nights are not just time blocks, they are psychological entry and exit points. They frame how your mind interprets the day and how it stores the memory of who you are becoming. Psychologically, the brain is most suggestible when it transitions between rest and activity. In the morning, your mind is unguarded. It hasn't yet been flooded with noise, stress, or comparison. Whatever you feed it first becomes the reference point for the rest of the day. If the first habit is distraction, urgency, or reaction, you start the day already behind. Your nervous system stays reactive, and focus becomes harder to reclaim. But when the morning begins with intention, movement, reflection, learning, or silence, you set direction before the world tries to set it for you. Philosophically, mornings represent agency. It's the one part of the day that belongs to you before demands arrive. How you use it signals how seriously you take your life. You don't need a perfect routine or a dramatic ritual. You need consistency. Even a small, disciplined morning habit tells your mind, I am in control of my direction. That belief compounds over time. It builds confidence not because the day goes perfectly, but because you started it on your terms. Nights matter just as much, but for a different reason. The brain consolidates identity while you sleep. What you do before bed influences what the mind rehearses unconsciously. If the night ends in chaos, endless scrolling, mental noise, unresolved emotion, the mind carries that tension into sleep. Over time, this erodes clarity and emotional regulation. But when the night closes with reflection, stillness, or intention, the brain organizes the day with meaning instead of stress. This is why people feel stuck even when they're working hard. They're productive during the day, but their mornings are rushed and their nights are unstructured. They never give their mind a clear signal about who they are or where they're going. So the brain defaults to survival mode. It keeps you busy, but not aligned. Morning habits set the trajectory, night habits lock it in. One is about direction, the other about reinforcement. Together they form a loop. Over time, that loop becomes identity, and identity shapes behavior without conscious effort. When mornings and nights are intentional, discipline stops feeling forced. You don't have to motivate yourself as much because your environment and rhythm are already supporting your goals. There's also a deeper truth here. How you begin and end your day reveals what you value most. If your first and last habits are consumption, distraction, or escape, the message is clear. Not to others, but to yourself. And the self listens more than you think. Confidence rises when actions align with values, and it collapses when they don't. That alignment is built quietly in the hours no one sees. This isn't about waking up at a certain time or following someone else's routine. It's about ownership. A focused morning doesn't have to be long. A meaningful night doesn't have to be elaborate. What matters is that these moments are intentional and repeated. Repetition is what turns effort into identity. Over time, these habits change how you experience life. You become less reactive, more grounded. Decisions become clearer because your mind isn't constantly playing catch up. Stress decreases, not because life gets easier, but because you've trained your nervous system to begin and end with stability. If you want to know where your life is headed, don't look at your goals. Look at how you start your day and how you end it, because those quiet moments are writing your future while the world is asleep. Once you become intentional with your mornings and your nights, something uncomfortable becomes impossible to ignore. The habits that feel easiest are often the ones costing you the most. Comfort has a quiet voice. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't announce danger. It simply invites you to stay where you are. Psychologically, that's why comfort is so powerful. It disguises itself as safety, even when it's slowly limiting your potential. The human brain is wired to conserve energy. From a survival standpoint, comfort makes sense. The problem is that in the modern environment, comfort rarely protects you from real danger. Instead, it protects you from growth. Avoiding discomfort feels harmless in the moment, but over time it shapes behavior. You begin choosing ease over effort, familiarity over progress, and short-term relief over long-term fulfillment. None of those choices feel destructive individually, but together they form a pattern, and deep patterns shape destiny. Philosophically, regret is not usually born from what people tried and failed at. It's born from what they never challenged. Comfort habits train you to lower your standards quietly. You stop asking more from yourself because asking will require effort, risk, and temporary discomfort. Over time, that internal negotiation erodes self-respect. You may still function. You may even succeed externally, but internally, something feels unresolved, like you're living below your capacity. Comfort habits often hide behind reasonable language. I'm tired. I deserve a break. I'll start tomorrow. None of those statements are lies. The danger is when they become default responses instead of conscious decisions. When comfort becomes automatic, discipline disappears. And when discipline disappears, time starts working against you instead of for you. Psychologically, avoidance reinforces fear. Each time you avoid a challenging habit, whether it's focused work, difficult conversations, physical exertion, or mental discipline, you teach your brain that discomfort is something to escape. That lesson compounds. What once felt mildly uncomfortable starts to feel threatening. This is how people become trapped, not by failure, but by familiarity. Comfort also creates the illusion of control. You feel in control because you're not being challenged. But real control comes from capacity, the ability to handle difficulty when it arrives. Comfort habits weaken that capacity. They make stress feel heavier, setbacks feel personal, and effort feel overwhelming. Life doesn't get harder. You become less conditioned to handle it. This is why long-term regret is often connected to ease. You look back and realize the time passed, not because you were forced to stop, but because you chose what was comfortable instead of what was necessary. The cost isn't obvious at first. It shows up years later as missed potential, delayed goals, and the painful question of what if? The solution isn't to reject comfort entirely. Rest matters. Recovery matters. The difference is intention. Rest chosen consciously restores you. Comfort chosen unconsciously erodes you. Growth requires deliberate discomfort. Small, manageable challenges practiced consistently. That's how strength is built without burnout. When you start replacing comfort habits with growth habits, something shifts internally. Effort stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like self-respect. Discomfort becomes familiar, and familiarity reduces fear. Over time, what once felt hard becomes normal. And what once felt normal, the comfort that held you back, becomes unacceptable. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It happens through daily decisions that no one applauds, choosing focus over distraction, choosing effort over ease, choosing long-term clarity over short-term comfort. These choices are rarely dramatic, but they are decisive. If comfort feels safe, remember this: comfort doesn't ruin lives suddenly. It slowly convinces you that you were never meant for more. Once you break free from comfort-driven habits, a new principle begins to reveal itself. Progress is rarely explosive, but is always cumulative. Most people underestimate small habits because they overvalue dramatic change. Psychologically, the brain is attracted to intensity. It wants transformation to feel obvious and immediate. But life doesn't move in leaps, it moves in layers. And those layers are built one day, one decision, one habit at a time. Compounding is a quiet force. You don't notice it early, and that's why most people quit before it works. A single disciplined action doesn't feel powerful. Reading 10 pages, waking up 30 minutes earlier, choosing focus over distraction for an hour, none of that feels life-changing in the moment. But the mind isn't designed to measure long-term accumulation emotionally. It measures comfort now. That's why faith in small habits requires maturity. You're trusting a process before the evidence appears. Philosophically, compounding teaches patience and humility. It forces you to accept that growth happens on nature's timeline, not your ego's. You plant seeds long before you see fruit. And that delay is not a flaw, it's a filter. It filters out people who need instant validation. It leaves behind those who can work in silence, trusting that alignment eventually creates momentum. Momentum is not motivation. Motivation is emotional and temporary. Momentum is mechanical. Once small habits are repeated enough, effort decreases and movement continues even on hard days. That's when progress becomes dangerous, in a good way, because now stopping takes more effort than continuing. Discipline has shifted from something you do to something that carries you. Psychologically, this is where identity locks in. When you see yourself showing up consistently, the brain updates its self-image. You stop seeing discipline as something you're forcing and start seeing it as something you naturally do. That identity shift is everything. Behavior follows identity faster than it follows goals. Once momentum is established, you don't ask if something is worth doing. You ask if it aligns with who you are. Small habits also protect you from overwhelm. Big goals intimidate the mind. They activate fear, doubt, and procrastination. Small habits bypass that resistance. They feel manageable, almost insignificant. But insignificance is their strength. They lower psychological friction while still moving you forward. Over time, direction matters more than speed. Consistent direction eventually produces undeniable results. This is also where most people misunderstand success. They think successful people are always doing more. In reality, they're often doing less, but with greater consistency. They're not relying on bursts of effort, they're relying on systems. Systems don't impress anyone early on, but they outperform everything else in the long run. Momentum compounds not just results, but confidence. Each small win reinforces belief, and belief changes how you approach challenges. You stop negotiating with resistance because you've seen proof. Proof that showing up works, even when it feels ordinary. That confidence isn't loud, it's grounded. It comes from evidence, not hype. And the same law applies in reverse. Small negative habits compound too. Distraction compounds into lost years. Avoidance compounds into fear. Inconsistency compounds into self-doubt. Momentum is neutral. It works in whatever direction you feed it. That's why daily habits matter so much. They are steering mechanisms, not just behaviors. The moment you understand compounding, urgency disappears, but commitment deepens. You stop rushing and start aligning. You stop chasing motivation and start protecting consistency. And eventually, what once required effort becomes inevitable. If you stay consistent long enough, small habits don't just change your pace, they change your power. Because momentum always favors the person who refuses to stop showing up. After everything we've talked about, identity, discipline, structure, discomfort, and momentum, it all comes down to one undeniable truth. Nothing changes until the habit changes. People often search for transformation in external places, a new environment, a new opportunity, a new version of themselves. But psychologically and philosophically, change doesn't begin with becoming someone new. It begins with doing something different, consistently, long enough for the mind to accept it as normal. Most people overestimate how much they need to change and underestimate how precise that change needs to be. You don't need to rebuild your life from scratch. You need to interrupt one pattern and replace it with a better one. Habits are leverage points. When you change one habit, it doesn't just affect one area. It reshapes thinking, emotion, and decision-making across your life. That's why small changes, when sustained, feel disproportionate in their impact. The mind resists change not because change is dangerous, but because uncertainty is uncomfortable. Familiar habits, even harmful ones, feel safe because they're predictable. New habits feel awkward, inefficient, and uncomfortable at first. That discomfort isn't a signal to stop. It's a signal that identity is being challenged. And identity always resists before it adapts. Philosophically, this is where responsibility becomes power. Once you accept that habits are choices repeated, not personality traits, you reclaim agency. You stop saying, that's just how I am, and start asking, what am I practicing? Because who you are today is largely the result of what you practiced yesterday. And who you become next is determined by what you practice starting now. Changing a habit also changes how you see yourself. When behavior shifts, the mind updates its self-image. You don't become confident and then act disciplined. You act disciplined and then confidence follows. You don't wait to feel focused. You practice focus and clarity emerges. Action leads identity, not the other way around. This is where people get stuck, waiting for internal permission that only comes after external proof. There's also a deeper philosophical layer here. Habits are how values become real. Anyone can claim values. Habits reveal them. What you repeatedly do is what you actually believe matters. When habits align with values, life feels coherent. When they don't, internal tension builds. That tension shows up as frustration, anxiety, or a vague sense of being off track. Changing habits resolves that tension, not by force, but by alignment. This process requires patience and honesty. You can't lie your way into a new habit. You have to show up, even when it's inconvenient, even when results aren't visible yet. That's where trust is rebuilt. Not trust in motivation, but trust in yourself. Every time you follow through, you restore credibility with your own mind. And self-trust is one of the most powerful psychological assets a person can have. As habits change, life doesn't suddenly become easy, but it becomes clearer. Decisions take less effort. Discipline feels less forced. Momentum begins to carry what willpower once had to push. You stop fighting yourself so much, and that internal alignment frees energy that was previously wasted on resistance and doubt. This is also where destiny shifts quietly, not through dramatic announcements, but through consistent direction. When habits change, days change. When days change, years follow. Destiny isn't rewritten all at once. It's edited daily, line by line, through what you choose to repeat. And here's the most empowering part. You don't have to wait for the perfect moment. Habits don't require permission. They require commitment. One decision practiced daily is enough to start a chain reaction your future self will thank you for, because when you change the habit, you don't just change what you do, you change who you're becoming. And once that changes, your destiny has no choice but to follow.